She wouldn't let go of it, friends. She has it on vacation right now, and she's sleeping with it every night. I know. So cute. Hi, friends. Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. These little pooches are so cute. Before I get into this free pattern, you need to know a couple things. I recently went to my very first quilt show, and I bought this pattern right here. It was Dapper Dachshund by Tilda. Well, I thought I was buying a pattern, but I was really buying 2 fat quarters. Because you know what? Tilda gives this pattern away for free. And thank you to one of my viewers who pointed it out to me that Tilda does put this out for free, which was really good that she pointed that out so that I could print out a new pattern and find out what I found out so that I could tell you what I found out. Tilda, she is a fabric designer and she is a good one too. One of my favorites, actually. Here's the deal. A quilt shop had put this together and then put the fat quarters in there. Well, when they printed them out, they did not print it out properly, and it printed out smaller than the pattern designer actually called for it. Now, how do I know that? Well, I cut out and I made a bunch in the smaller size. The one here that was printed out from the show that I bought for $10. But I really wasn't buying the pattern, remember that. I was buying the fat quarters. When I printed it out at home, it says right on the pattern to scale it to 100%. Look at that difference, friends. This, my friends, is a huge difference when it comes to making one of these pooches. I thought it was kind of small when I was making it for the first time, the first 5 times, until I printed it out properly. So once I printed it out properly, or I thought it was proper, and how did I know that it was the proper whatever size? Well, that's what my husband does for a living. He actually is a mastermind when it comes to taking apart printers and copiers and computers and all that. So he made sure that it printed out at 100% for me. One of the clues was in this pattern. It says that the approximate end size should be 16.5 inches long. Well, my little pooches right here, they are 13.75 inches long. Yeah. This one is the only one I've made with the larger pattern, the one directly from Tilda's website. And can I tell you, it only measures 14.75 inches long. So I'm not sure where they're coming up with the 16.5 inches approximate size and length, because there's no way that you can print it out any bigger than what I initially printed it out when you scale it to 100%. So yeah, I'm not sure on those measurements, but the pattern is too cute not to make regardless of inches, right? Now, a lot of you might know already that I am a very visual learner, so I teach visually. I love that Tilda gave this pattern for free, but friends, I can't follow it. No, I have trouble following patterns that just have words. I've taken it upon myself to help us all out, and I have rewrote this pattern from start to finish with my tips and tricks and things that I would do differently to make it easier. I have it in full color. It's all detailed out in written and pictures within the instructions. And on my detailed full color written instructions, I've added a QR code directly to Tilda's pattern for the Dapper Dachshund. The pattern's free. My full color detailed written instructions are free. And I do a full tutorial in this video on these cutie pies right here. Enough talking already. Let's get busy making Tilda's Dapper Dachshund pooches. So after you've cut your pattern pieces out, then you need to transfer those arrows for the grain line onto your fabric. So if you're following the grain line here, you can see the selvage there. That needs to be folded in half if you're doubling it, and then lay your pattern down. So you want the selvage to be running up and down, because when we stuff this thing, you know, we don't want it to twist and such, and it will if it's not properly set on grain. So you've taken the pattern piece and laid it down onto 2 right side together main fabrics. Then you're going to add the tail marks, just like I'm showing here with my ruler visually, and it's about a 1/2 inch space there. I changed this part of the construction because the tail needed to go inside that seam allowance, so that way it was not hard to sew that on. You're then going to go ahead and transfer that V shape on the head pattern piece onto both wrong sides of main fabric. You want to make sure that those transfer marks are the same on both sides because we want a perfectly round head, right? Next, you're going to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the entire main part of the dog. And you're also going to go right above that V shape, continuing that seam allowance. Then you're going to pin both fabrics together and then go ahead and cut that outer line that you just made, that 1/4 inch line, around the entire dog. The original pattern does not include the seam allowances, so that's why we put them in now. Again, you're going to make sure that your grain line is correct up and down, and you can see the selvage area there because the selvage runs along the grain line. Important to note too that this underdog piece, all you have to do is take 1 fat 1/4 and fold it in half on the grain line, and that will give you enough fabric. So you're then going to trace along the pattern piece all along the top and make sure that you put the marks in there where we are going to turn our work at. It's very important to go all the way to the point of the top of this under part, and then you're going to just go ahead and trace all along the bottom area. Here's where it may get a bit tricky for you. You're going to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance only along the bottom portion here of the under part of the dog. You're not going to add a top 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take note here where I stopped that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I stopped it right at each point on the left and the right. Now you're going to take it to your sewing machine and you're only going to sew from one top point to the other top point. You can see me pointing there all the way to the right there. But you also want to make sure that you stop and leave that opening in the center there. And here I'm showing you on the sewing machine, I started at the very top left. I'm going to stop right here and I'm going to make sure that I back stitch a couple times. And I'm going to skip that whole space there in the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a back stitch here and continue on all the way until I get to that very top point. And I'm going to want to back stitch there for sure as well. Once that's sewn across the top, then you're going to take your scissors and you're going to cut along that outer 1/4 inch seam allowance that you made from the inner pattern one. It's very important to take note of what I'm going to mark right here. I'm marking about 1/8 of an inch above these points. Once I have those points marked 1/8 of an inch above where it peaks right there on the left and right, then I'm going to take my pinking shears next and cut right across there and across the entire top portion. Once you get that top area and the bottom all cut up just the way that I showed you, you're going to take your pins out, open it up, and give it a press along the bottom there. And you can see the opening. The way we want to press here is very particular too. It's very mindful. You can see that it curves up in the bum area and the neck area. We want to make sure that we follow that curve with our iron as we press, so that way the curve lays nice and flat as it curves up. Okay, set this piece aside for now and let's work on the tail. Be sure to follow the grain line on the pattern piece here, otherwise your tail will be twisted. Ask me how I know. You're going to put your 2 fabrics right side together and trace around the pattern piece, and that will be your sew line as well. Be sure to continually lift your presser foot and pivot around these tight curves and corners. If you don't, you will have a kind of, odd shaped tail within the seam allowance. Make sure that you leave that opening on the end. Don't sew that up. We need to turn it through that space in the bottom of this tail. Next, you're going to pink all around that tail, and then you're going to struggle and turn it right side out because it is a tiny little thing and it was really hard to turn right side out. I'm not gonna lie, but it totally can be done and you can do it too. Just take your time and don't rip into your fabric. Oh my word, I cannot remember what that little tool's name is. That little metal thing with the ring on the end that squeezes it shut and grabs, you know, I can't think of it. If you know it, let me know in the comments. I totally forgot it. But anyways, I used that to squeeze some polyfill and then stuff that into the very tip and then was able to get, you know, a good stuffing in there. And since we're diverting from the original instructions and we're actually going to insert the opening into our dog, into the seam allowance, we don't even have to worry about what the frayed edge looks like at the end, right? Next, you're going to put your inner and your outer fabric right sides together to make one of the ears. And you're going to want to make sure that you have that opening. This is diverting also from the original instructions. I leave an opening on the side there so that we can turn our ear. So you're just going to continue to sew along that line and be sure to pivot and turn as you go. And then you're going to just pink all around where your original line from the pattern was. Turn your ear right side out and you're going to take a tool, like a turning tool type thing, and go all along the seam allowance area on the inside, making sure that all the seams are nicely pushed out. Fold the seam allowance inward and then take it to your pressing station and press that nicely. Now, the original instructions also did not call for polyfill in the ears, but I did go ahead and put a couple pinches in there. I just thought it would look really cute being a tad bit puffy on the ears. Next, I grabbed a needle and thread and I just did a really small slip stitch all along the edge there, and honestly, it cleaned up just so perfectly right there. You can't even tell that there's any stitching going on there, none whatsoever. So I was really pleased with the way the ears really did turn out. After you're done sewing that ear, you can go ahead and kind of, you know, mush it around just to make sure that everything is nicely distributed within those ears. Let me know in the comments, do you think I should have left the poly out of the ears? Nah. So next, you're going to take that tail and unclip the end and make sure that that polyfill is shoved up there nice and tight away from that seam allowance area. So you're going to take that opening of the tail and place it on the marks that you made earlier for the tail. Pin one side and then pin the other side. And you're going to just go ahead and take it to your sewing machine and tack it down. So once that tail is stitched in place, we won't have to really worry about it shifting at any other point because it's already right there. I would take this moment though and just double check by flipping it out to make sure that you have it going in the right direction. Now this next step is so important that if you leave it out, your dog will not be able to stand. Just take some leftover batting squares and put some polyfill inside, roll it up, and sew it right down the middle. Make sure that you do have some poly sticking out on the ends though. That will help where the tip of the foot is. This was my first prototype. Yeah. Now take your underside piece that's been sewn together and you're going to lay that on one of the main pieces, just like you see how I'm laying it here. You don't want to get this part mixed up because then your feet will end up all backwards. Yep. Pin in place all around the entire bottom area, and you can see how I'm pulling that seam part away right there at the top of one of the V's. You want to do that on both sides, otherwise you're going to be all crinkled up in that V area and you don't want that. So make sure that you have a full seam all the way by simply pulling that one seam that you're not sewing right now up and over and out of the way and giving that bottom seam a clear stitching guideline. And because I was using a heat erasable pen, I went ahead and drew that point back on there. You need that point from the original pattern piece line, the sew line, you need that on there. And that is where you're going to start sewing, is on one of those points. So you want to make sure that they're both there. And I think I had to go ahead and add the point back in there on this side too. Yeah, so you can see me there drawing it back in You need that because you need to know where to stop and start. And make sure that you backstitch too. Don't forget, we need to backstitch everywhere on this. So you've started sewing at the top of one of the V's, and you're going to go all the way around the bottom area. Be sure to lift your presser foot and pivot at every single turn because we don't want wonky looking feet. We want them to be as round as possible, right? Right. And you can see that I'm following along the exact line from the original pattern piece because remember, there was no seam allowances. So that was the actual sew line that I'm sewing on right now. Take your time when you get to the end and make sure that you hit right on the tip top of that V shape there, and make sure that you backstitch. Use your tweezers or whatever you need to do to make sure that you can get in there nice and tight and get that stitch where it needs to be. So this is what you should have so far. Just that bottom portion is all sewed on there. And next I'm going to take it over to my cutting mat here and show you how we're going to attach the other main piece. Next, we're going to sew the other half of the bottom area, the under part, to only half of the main part of the other one. That's all we're going to concentrate on right now, just getting all of that bottom portion pinned up. Make sure that all of your lines are lined up and be sure that that tail is, nicely tucked in there and ready to go within the seam allowance. You're just going to pin on both sides of that tail again. Everything should line up in that front V area and back by the end area, the bum area. Those V's should all line up now right at the very tip of where you just saw me pin, and I'm just making sure that everything is laying really nice right there. You want to double check that to make sure because you don't want to sew that wonky, right? And just like before, when I pulled that other seam allowance out of the way on the other side of the V right there, you can see me tugging at it. So that way I have a clear guide all the way to get to that point again. Once you have the other side of the bottom all sewed up to the V area, the tip, you're going to turn it a little bit right side out and check both V areas. What you're looking for is to make sure that there's no puckers and everything is laying perfectly nice. If it's not laying nice, then you need to unpick and redo that part. I know, but it's worth it, trust me. Go ahead and just pin all along the rest of the area, the whole top area that needs to be sewed. And you should be pinning together both main parts of the dog at this point. Next, take it to your sewing machine and you're going to sew right on that line. Once it's all sewn up, double check and make sure that in that area, in the V, the tip of it, that there's no holes there, that you don't see any light through those. Those should be nice and tight. And then you're going to turn it right side out and check that area for holes on both the bum end and the neck area. Once you've checked both of those V areas and everything checks out perfectly, then you're going to put it back to wrong side out. And you're going to pink all around the entire area of your dog. If you don't have pinking shears, you can always put notches all the way around. Next, you're going to go to the head area where you marked those marks, the V shapes, and you're going to pull those apart, just like you see me doing here, right at the seam. You're going to squeeze those together so they're perfectly aligned on both sides. Make sure you put a few pins in there because you don't want to mess this up. You don't want a lopsided head, trust me. Once your marks are aligned and you've pinned it, then you're going to take it to your sewing machine and you're going to sew right on that line, right along the curve. Don't forget to backstitch on those. And then you're going to cut any excess off that's there with your pinking shears or put a few notches in there. Now that the head's been sewn, we can turn it right side out and make sure that you poke out all of the little feet. I use these little plastic blue tools that I got at the dollar store and they work perfectly for this. So this is what you should have so far. He looks perfect, except I think he's a little bit skinny. We need to puff him up. The first thing that you're going to stuff inside your dog is his legs. This is what's going to help him stand. I take my tweezers and I kind of grab it and then push him down into there. And because we put that polyfill on the end of the batting, before and after we rolled it up, there was that batting sticking out. That's going to help his little paws puff out at the end, and it does look adorable. Oh my word. Once all 4 of the legs are in, then it's time to stuff the rest of him. The next thing I stuff is the nose because it's the tiniest portion left to stuff. You just make sure that you stuff it really down in there. Otherwise, you're going to have a gap in there and you're not going to be happy with it. So just stuff it until, you know, you're happy. I mean, I think it took more stuffing than I thought it would, but, you know, it is what it is. I have a big box of it, so, you know. Once you're happy with how much he's stuffed, then you're going to grab your needle and thread and you're going to do just a very nice small slip stitch all along the bottom. And this was kind of hard for me because it was such a gap right there. So I kind of had to push them together and hold him while I actually stitched it. It was a little awkward, but you know, I was trying to do it on camera and then I had to turn my camera off because I just couldn't do it anymore on camera. So I had to put him between my legs and kind of hold him. So in the end, he turned out really nice in the bottom area, and you can see right there, it's invisible. You can't even see a slip stitch. So cute. Now it's time to tackle the ears on this dachshund. So what I did was transfer the top dot and halfway down the line on the actual pattern piece, and then I, you know, transferred them onto the outside inner piece of the ear. The diagram here is also in the visual written instructions that I made up to go along with Tilda's Dapper Dachshunds. I just felt like it didn't need to be that big of a gap in between those 2 marks where I was sewing. So that's why I changed that. So here you can see I'm just lining things up, and you do have to do this by eye. There's no rhyme or reason on how to actually, you know, get him even on the side of the face. You just have to line them up and pin them on. And then what you're going to do is hand sew through the head and then to the dot that you marked on that inner piece. But you don't want to go all the way through to the outer ear because we don't want any visible stitches whatsoever. To get to the second dot, I lifted the ear up from the bottom and then went in at it that way. I didn't sew like a line from dot to dot. I just sewed the ear on at each dot. I hope that makes sense to what I actually did. Here is a close-up shot of those 2 dot areas where I sewed the ear on. Next, you're going to just line up that other ear now on the other side so that it's even with the other one and sew that on just like you did that one. So what do you think? Are you going to give it a go? I sure hope so. These little guys are too cute not to make. Be sure to send me pictures if you do. My email is thesewingchannel33@gmail.com. Take a look at your screen right now. I've got more tutorials up my sleeve. Go ahead and click on it, and I'll see you in the next tutorial so we can keep learning together. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care.